All right, so hello and welcome to episode 1 of the Daily Tide podcast. I would love to start by just saying we are sitting and recording on unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Today we have Chloe Robinson with us. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
So I guess just to start off, what do you do? What's your profession? What's your title?
So I am the Research and Conservation Manager for the Southern Vancouver Island Cetacean Research Initiative as part of OceanWise.
Awesome. So kind of expand on that. What's that about? What's your research center?
So my role is mainly to do with designing and delivering the research elements of OceanWise. So this is within the Whales Initiative department, which essentially deals with all of the marine mammal research that is conducted at OceanWise. So that's split between different offices. So we have like a photogrammetry team that takes the aerial shots of the killer whales, which I'm sure people are quite familiar with. We also have a North Coast. We have an office in the North Coast. We have an office in Vancouver. And so basically I'm the manager of the office in Victoria. So it's kind of a mix of research, outreach, all to do with marine mammals and conservation.
That's really, really cool. So right now, are you focusing on like any main marine mammal or cetacean, I guess, right now?
Yeah, so the main species that a lot of the work that I do will go towards conserving is the southern resident killer whale population. So as part of my role, I am so the Victoria office is part of the BC Cetacean Sightings Network, and there is basically an app where you can report whale sightings through Whale Report, and then this goes and essentially alerts boats in the area through the Whale Report alert system that there's a whale in close proximity, and this basically helps prevent boat strikes and sort of mortalities and injuries through ship strikes and collisions. So that's kind of the main species that we focus on, but also humpbacks, basically any cetacean that is in BC's waters obviously will benefit from this in terms of the alert system and also just generating information through reporting sightings.
That's really cool. I guess a lot of people, including myself, that's like a very specific kind of field of making sure you're reporting specifically cetaceans and stuff. How did you get into that? Were you always interested in specifically cetaceans, or has that varied over the years?
Yeah, so I've kind of been obsessed with killer whales since, oh gosh, I was a child. I think the Free Willy movies definitely got me into cetaceans. And so I always knew that I wanted to work with whales and dolphins, but I didn't really know how to get there. And all I knew was I had to get to university. That was kind of my goal. But my story is kind of interesting because I kind of went about it the long way. So I didn't go sort of directly into marine biology because I was really unsure at sort of the age of, between 16 and 18. I think it's quite a young age to have to decide what you want to do in your future. So I got some great advice that if you're unsure, stay broad. So I kind of went a little bit down the zoology route so I could do more things such as genetics, which wasn't actually available at my university at the time as a marine biology module. So so you can probably tell by my accent, I'm not from Canada, so I'm originally from the UK. So I did all 3 of my degrees in Swansea University, which is in South Wales in the UK. And I mainly chose that university because it was right on the coast. It's a very, very big marine mammal kind of area. And essentially I knew that if I stayed around this area and made some connections, I would eventually kind of work with whales and dolphins, and that's kind of what happened. So I was happy for that.
Yeah, I guess that's like any area around the coast is always a perfect spot to research marine biology. That makes a lot of sense. So you said you started kind of like broad, like studying more zoology. Was that just because you just wanted to work with animals or more like marine stuff? Did you know you said you always wanted to work with the ocean, but and whales and cetaceans? Did you kind of try out different paths before you really landed on cetaceans?
Yeah, so I, as an sort of an ecologist, which is I guess the broadest term I would kind of call myself, I kind of appreciate that everything's connected. So I actually started my real first ever research. So in my undergrad, I looked at flight behavior of Andean condors, which was a little bit different, but it kind of got me on the path of, okay, you can collect all this data from an animal without ever kind of seeing it, which I thought was really cool based on tags that they have on the backs of the birds.
Right.
And my first, what I would call real sort of thesis work, was in my master's degree, where I took on a project looking at brown trout and how the effects of barriers on the population genetics, to basically see how genetically dissimilar populations are each side of a difficult to pass barrier. And in my mind, I was like, well, I always want to work with whales and dolphins, especially killer whales. And obviously, salmonid's a food source of these animals. So that's kind of what kept me in my spirits when I was doing that, which was a great master's program. Mm-hmm. And really, that got me on the path of working with DNA, especially environmental DNA, also called eDNA, which is a really cool way, basically, you collect samples, for example, of water from the sea or rivers, and you can find DNA from species that you want to target. So that's kind of where I went after my master's. And through this, I actually designed a whole project to do after my PhD, looking at collecting DNA from basically the snot of dolphins, which wow. It was kind of, it's been done a few times in sort of bigger species such as humpbacks and killer whales. But basically in a paper, they said, oh, this is impossible for anything smaller than a killer whale. So being the stubborn tourist that I am, I was like, hey, I want to try this. So basically throughout my whole master's and PhD, I volunteered for a UK cetacean charity called Sea-Watch Foundation. And the 5 years spent with them, I built loads of networks and connections in the marine sector in Wales. And I actually pitched and got funding to do sort of a short-term research assistant project where we actually went out on the boat and collected snot from dolphins. So wow. I was really able to combine my DNA background with all the volunteer work I'd done with Sea-Watch Foundation to basically create a really neat little research project, which actually got published in 2020.
That's incredible. What does that process look like, getting snot from dolphins? How does that work?
So some people use drones. This is often used for the bigger whales, but we kind of knew that wasn't really going to work for small dolphins, such as common dolphins and bottlenose dolphins, which we get off the coast of Wales. So essentially we had it's a window cleaning pole. So it's a really long telescopic pole. And we basically had a suction cup at the end where we put a Petri dish. And based on the behavior of both those species, they tend to bow ride on the fronts of the boat. And especially common dolphins they don't really care what's going on around them. So we were essentially off the front of the boat waiting for an animal to come up to surface. And then we would essentially move the Petri dish over and basically collect the exhalation. And then we would retrieve it and then sort of store it on ice. So this kind of very sort of targeted approach, targeting individuals as they come up to surface, seemed to work pretty well. We had about 30 odd samples, but we did find that it was difficult to get DNA from them because they are small, they have a smaller lung capacity. But essentially we proved that we could get DNA from smaller dolphins, which was really cool.
Yeah, that's an incredibly impressive feat, especially after a large group of other professionals say that's basically just not possible. That's
it was
very
nice.
incredible.
It was nice to rewrite that in the literature.
Yeah, no, that's incredibly impressive. To kind of just think back to university and all of that, was when you were in high school, were you like very focused on post-secondary, or was it kind of just like a spur of the moment in the middle of grade 12 kind of situation, like a lot of other students?
I was pretty focused on going to university from, I would say, sort of in the UK we have GCSE exams, which are around grades 9 and 10. So I think even before those, I was very aware of what I wanted to do. And actually part of this was because at the age of 11, I got in touch with Dr. Ingrid Visser, who's in New Zealand working with killer whales. And she was really my inspiration from a very, very young age. And she gave me great career advice as to what sort of path I could end up on if I did certain things and studied certain things. So I took her advice, and I essentially went down this path, and I knew that I wanted to go to university. I knew that I wanted to be on the coast, and I kind of knew what I wanted to research in terms of I wanted to end up working with cetaceans, but I wasn't really sure how to get there. So I stayed pretty broad in terms of sticking with zoology as opposed to marine biology, because at the time the universities that I was looking at didn't offer the same kind of diversity of modules. Now it's very different, but back then I knew I wanted to have a broader spectrum of choices. And that's kind of why I went down more the zoology route. But I always knew that was, where I wanted to go and what exactly I wanted to study.
Right. I guess your job, I mean, just hearing from, being on a boat, you even let me know like yesterday or a few days ago, you were on a boat all day. Is this just kind of your job in general, or usually out on the ocean like this? I guess many zoologists, like some of them, go more on like in the field for real. But for you, you focus on marine life. So is it usually just on the ocean?
Yeah, so yesterday was actually, Friday. It was quite unique. We were essentially just moving the research vessel, and it was kind of like hey, do you want to come and do some like opportunistic like photo ID of some cetaceans on a research vessel? And I was like, yeah. So actually, it's probably what I love most about my job. It's so varied. So some days, I may jump on a boat and go out and do some photography. Again, most of it's weather dependent, and Friday was gorgeous. So that kind of was a bit opportunistic, but my day-to-day can look very different. It could be in the office writing grants. I could be out at a dock giving a talk, chatting to the public. I could be, taking part in something like this. So actually, that's the best part of my job. It's incredibly diverse. And often I could be doing a range of different things. Each week essentially doesn't look the same. And that's actually what I love. I love variety in my work. And I think because there's so many factors around cetaceans and marine conservation, that is a brilliant part of it. You can be doing field work, you can be, data crunching and writing papers, you can be, having meetings with collaborators, and that's the diversity is what I love.
Yeah, that's kind of sounds like the dream job. I feel like a lot of people, when they think of marine biology, like the first thing they go to is like just being on a boat all day.
Yeah.
And I mean, for me personally, that sounds like phenomenal, and that diversity as well, like photography and all that. That sounds really, really lovely. Would you say being on a boat is your favorite part of the job, or do you have something that you especially love to do?
Oh, that's tough. I think I love data. I'm a bit of a data geek, and I love playing with data and pulling out trends. But I guess I would probably say yes, boats, just because seeing a whale the first time versus seeing a whale the thousandth time gives me the same feeling. And really, those long winters data crunching when the weather conditions aren't ideal for boats, and then you go out and you see the animals and you have incredible encounters, and you manage to get photo ID matches, and you figure out that individual's history, where they've been over months and years. I would say the boat is definitely the best part, but it's kind of complemented by doing all the office-based working, and you get the grant to go out and do that work, and it's really satisfying to sort of see the whole process.
Well, could you expand on that process? It sounds like it takes a while just to get to that point where you're able to go out on the boat after spending time in the lab and such.
So a lot of boat research is quite sort of labor and monetary wise expensive. So to kind of secure this work, there's a lot of grant writing that goes into sort of people in my kind of level of position. And so essentially you start off with kind of an idea, and you sort of see, we have a great funding team at Oceanwise that kind of let us know when there's different sort of calls open. And then we essentially come together as a team. We write activities for the grants, or sticking with the different requirements and the what the funders are specifically looking to target. And then we kind of get together an idea, write it up into a nice sort of package proposal, and then we send it off and hope it comes through. And then on those cases where it does, it's great news. Essentially, we go out and do our research, and then we normally have to report either annually or sort of every season, and give them updates on where we are. And then often outputs such as research papers or presentations, go to conferences, and essentially that science that comes out of that then gets sort of fed into the next grant we're looking for to sustain the project or to start a new project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I don't think a lot of people expect such a long process when it comes to even smaller research projects as well. But yeah, that's good to know, and for in the future when you're working on those big lab projects. Would you say that like that's like the biggest thing to keep in mind is like just the time that it takes to create these long projects? Would you say like that's something that a lot of people don't expect?
Yeah, and also I think, and this is something that I wish the kind of university curriculum would cover, and that is grant writing in itself. So, you know, I've gone from undergrad to master's to PhD student to postdoc and then into my current role. And nowhere along the line does anyone teach you how to write grants. It's not really covered anywhere. Like some modules may sort of do mock grants, and this is actually something that I really benefited from in my master's. It was actually my previous master's supervisor who had a module where there's something called the Darwin Initiative, where you basically create and you write a fake grant for a species that you want to conserve. And obviously it's marked as coursework, but that was my first ever time seeing a grant and how to write it. But it's incredibly difficult to write a grant from scratch when you've never written a grant. And it's really hard to gain experience in doing that until you're essentially in sort of a managerial position, because a lot of even postdocs, which are people that have PhDs, can't hold their own grant money. So it's really difficult to get into that process. And I would actually recommend, more than anything, I wish someone had told me there is actually a website, which I can link you with after when I find it, but it's where a lot of people in different fields post their failed grants. So you can access old grants and kind of use it as sort of a template to see kind of how things are written, because grant writing is very different to essay writing, is very different to paper writing. It's very, you know, the language, the structure is very, very different. And that's something that I wish I could have been actually taught and not just expected to trial and error my way through until something's sort of stuck.
Right.
That's definitely something that I wish there was more out there. And now there's, especially conferences offer grant writing workshops. And that's kind of what I would recommend if you're serious about going through and doing your own research projects, either in academia or in an NGO or for consultancy. Getting to grips with grant writing, even from an undergrad level, is 100% worth it.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting to think about. Sorry, it's just something like that's seemingly so important in many marine sciences, and yet there's not that much studying or projects that you do when you're in school. Would you say that occurs often, where there's some stuff left out that's more like the business side of
sure.
research? Yeah,
it's definitely, and this is something that I've tried to. When I was teaching at university, I tried to kind of implement in some of the modules I was teaching, because I believe it's so important to, even if you don't want to go through and, you know, be a postdoc or a professor or, you know, go into these kind of positions, it's really good to know the nuts and bolts of how a project came to be. You know, if you start a master's or a PhD that's fully funded, ask your supervisor, what process did you have to go through to get this? You know, they can show you their grant application. They can show you the steps they had to do, because again, for some of these big grants, most of the time you have 3-4 rounds of, you know, revisions or stages, and you're up against thousands of people. And I would say that, yeah, the grant writing and also paper writing. So this is, again, something that you maybe start a master's or even an undergrad, and they go, turn your thesis into a paper. And you just have to kind of go, well, I don't know how to do that, because you're not taught how to write papers. You're taught to, you know, write coursework to a specific university's guidelines, but you know, journal to journal things are different, you know, and that's really something that again isn't taught. And it's, you know, writing your first paper can be so difficult because you just get it back from your supervisor and it's all read, you know, where they've edited it so much, and it's gives you a little bit of imposter syndrome, because you're like, oh my god, I'm doing this and I can't even write a paper. So I wish there was more at the undergrad level especially, and obviously postgraduate, to kind of have this paper writing course that gives you an idea of how to turn, you know, results, how to turn data into, you know, a story, because a paper is more than just, you know, words on paper. It's a whole story, and how, you know, you got there and what the implications are. But this is often not taught, and you have to kind of learn on the job, and it's incredibly stressful when you're already doing, you know, an undergrad or a postgraduate degree, to then have to sort of relearn this almost whole different style of writing to publish something.
Right. Yeah, so that's like a really good thing to keep in mind for other students or youth, I guess, who are listening, who are interested in going a field similar to your own. Would you say there are other little pieces of advice or things to look out for that people who are hopefully going into university or just starting out should look out for?
For sure. My biggest bit of advice is volunteer. Find somewhere you can volunteer. Without the volunteer work, I would not have got my postdoc, and without my postdoc, I would not be in this position. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was a little bit of a contentious issue because my PhD supervisor at the time wasn't that keen on me spending so much of my time doing something for free that wasn't really related to my PhD. But I volunteered for Sea-Watch Foundation for 5 years, and in that time I learned all my boat skills that I have now. I learned how to do photo ID. I learned how to communicate with the public. I learned how to identify more species. I learned so much in my volunteer work, and having that on paper shows commitment, and it shows that you're really interested, even if what you're studying is a little bit outside of what you really want to end up doing. This shows where your passions lie. And I've had many comments on my CV going, wow, you volunteered for 5 years, whilst doing a PhD and a master's. Again, everyone's individual capacity, that might not be possible for everyone, even if it's a couple of days at the weekend. I would recommend find something you're interested in, volunteer, and that helps you build networks. People will remember you if you're keen and you want to give your free time towards something. And there's loads of organizations that you can volunteer for in any capacity, whether remote data processing, which I started with at first, or I say in the field doing surveys. And over time, I built so many connections, even to this day, that I still collaborate with. So my biggest piece of advice for anyone going into this field is find somewhere you can volunteer, whether it be, a couple of times a year, whether it be every week. Just find somewhere that would work for you.
Yeah, it's odd. A lot of schools and high schools try to push the like volunteering and work experience, but I think the oddest part is when you get into university. It seems to like drop away. I've been doing a lot of research. I'm applying myself right now, and it kind of that whole idea of volunteering a lot stops. So kind of keeping that in mind as you're, just because you're in your university doesn't mean you're not a student really anymore. You're continuing that, and you should stick with volunteering. Sure. Yeah, that's a really good point. Kind of continuing on kind of university and all that. After you said you began teaching after you finished your degree. Could you expand on that as well? What did you begin teaching? Where?
Yeah, so actually it was during my PhD. So I did all 3 of my degrees at the same university, kind of back to back. And during my PhD, I was offered the great opportunity to sort of co-develop a coastal, like rocky shore ecology coastal module as part of a wider module. So I had a really great staff member at Swansea guide me through that process. And essentially I designed a piece of field work where students would go out to the rocky shore and they would find some species to sort of sit and draw. And actually a lot of this inspiration came from a lot of the work I was sort of reading into and the direction I wanted to go, sort of regarding especially North American indigenous cultures and the kind of the ways of learning. And I really wanted them to kind of sit and immerse themselves in the environment and draw and think about adaptations and think about the role of that species in sort of the greater ecological system. And then we had essentially I wanted them just to draw, and not so much scientifically. I wanted them just to explore the creature and draw it in relation to other things, and that was a really great module, and I got really great feedback on that. And we looked at things like zonation, so how species differ from the shore all the way up to kind of the sandbank area. And then we had some sort of written up coursework about adaptations and maybe how the species would either survive or maybe not survive with climate change, such as a warming temperature or higher sea levels. So I really wanted them to think about, in terms of this snapshot in time, how would that change in so many years with a warming climate. And then from there, when I got to the University of Guelph in Ontario, when I did my postdoc, I also taught some methods in evolution to do with population genetics and looking at how different populations are related in terms of sort of over geographical distances, and how that kind of influences or how their evolution influenced that pathway.
That's really interesting. So are you continuing to teach that course, or was that kind of like a one-off thing?
So I kind of taught that for 2 to 3 years as part of my postdoc. So I didn't so much do the lecturing, but I ran the lab. So it's all computer-based lab work, and we use all these different softwares to produce sort of phylogenetic trees and everything. And I don't teach that anymore. I'm now based in Victoria in BC. So I sort of finished that teaching April just gone. It was a great experience though, and it gave me a really interesting insight from student feedback as to what sort of methods work best to engage students and help them understand these really, really, sometimes really complex softwares. And I made sure to make these links to real life conservation scenarios on how these methods can be applied to address conservation questions.
Right. That's very interesting. That sounds like a class that you wouldn't really expect in a marine biology course, but that sounds like a very cool kind of combination of like tech, art, and marine sciences all in one. That's very, very cool. I guess kind of on the topic of changing the game, if you will, do you see the industry changing right now? I remember you said you spoke when you were 11 years old with another marine biologist that you really looked up to, and have you realized as the years have gone by that the industry is really changing right now, especially with climate change and different kind of sciences and arts colliding now, like you said as well? Have you seen that much?
Yeah, for sure. I think the way I think it's changed the most is obviously with technology. We can do a lot more now that we never could do even 10 years ago. And this is kind of direction of my research ethics has always been be as least invasive as possible when you work with creatures. So in particular, the eDNA is a great way to do this because you basically sample from the environment. You don't sort of capture the animal and take their DNA. So, and there wasn't really much of that. So 10, 15 years ago, eDNA was a very new concept. And this allows us a whole other way of collecting, data from marine systems using the DNA that animals leave behind. But also more than that, there's other things have been sort of developed, such as bioacoustics, so using hydrophones to detect species. And you look back far enough and people were able to go out on a boat and capture a dolphin from the sea, put it on the boat, do all these measurements and things, and then release it, with unknown harm to the animal. And I see there's obviously a lot more stronger permits and regulations now, and I think that's a great thing because it protects the animals. Because even as for science, it can be very, very destructive to the animal, and it can actually cause a lot of stress. So I'm seeing a shift towards a lot more non-invasive methods, which is great. And another shift that I'm seeing for sure is when I was young, there was not many female marine biologists or females in general working with cetaceans that I could really see. There was not much representation for basically anyone apart from sort of men in science. And I'm seeing as time goes on, I'm finding more and more females working in the field, especially myself being a queer female. This was something that I really struggled to find any form of representation, which led to a lot of imposter syndrome for myself. And I was told throughout school to quit trying for marine biology because I wasn't cut out for it. It wasn't a women's world, step away. And this was only 10 years ago. So to see such big pushes, for women in STEM and, 500 queer scientists and things like this, it's really great to see a lot more diversity in the sciences. And I think this has led to some incredible science.
Yeah, that's it's such like a heartwarming thing to hear when you just meet one more scientist who isn't exactly what you expect. And I'm queer myself, and seeing I don't know, just seeing a lot more women, a lot more queer people, just in general, more marginalized people in sciences. It's just like a very uplifting,
for sure,
just an uplifting thing to see. And
yes,
I teach as well. I teach younger students who are queer, and I think that's always just so important. I mean, everyone says that representation matters, but you never really realize it until you need that representation. And then when you see that, it feels so wonderful. So yeah, I really appreciate like you teaching and you sharing that experience. That's very, very special. And it's also very exciting to see how this industry is changing in all of those ways.
Yeah, especially like being young myself, if I was to find, a queer, female identifying scientist, I would have been beside myself because I could barely find female scientists, let alone, queer female scientists. So for me, whenever, even now, when I Wikipedia someone and sort of find out that they're queer, I get so excited. I'm like, hey, this is like me at a higher level. This is me represented. And people don't understand that, as you say, until you see yourself in someone who's high up, incredibly successful, and you just want to hear their story. You want to hear how they got there. And I think it's so important. Again, this is something I wish was sort of more available, especially even in lower school levels. I think it's something that should be there a lot more abundantly.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think in university it's lovely to see, but we need it in secondary schools, even elementary schools. We need all of that as well. Just speaking about a change again, so your industry, obviously, and your field, it's impacted by climate change, like basically every other field in marine sciences and marine biology. Would you say that a lot of your industry is changing to kind of fit that and help fix a lot of those issues?
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest impact that climate change is really having on a lot of the research, even over the 5 years that I volunteered for Sea Watch Foundation, the biggest impact was the increase of bad weather conditions that meant we couldn't get out on the boats. And this was actually something that we had a few years where we essentially had a handful of surveys, and that really impacts the conservation work that you do, because if you can't find these animals and you can't identify these animals, you don't know what's happening in that year. You don't know of new births, you don't know of new deaths. And it becomes incredibly difficult to fulfill your plans with your funders and everything. And so that's definitely one way I would say that it's been affected. And with warming sea conditions, that affects a lot of the cetacean prey species, such as salmonids, especially off the coast of BC here. So the endangered southern resident killer whales mostly feed on Chinook salmon, and they've been suffering severe population crashes because of the damming of rivers and essentially over exploitation of these species. But one of the biggest impacts that is really concerning is warming seas. So with warming seas, you have different sort of phytoplankton blooms, and obviously the fish that these salmonids eat when they're in the sea then have sort of population booms at different times. And often the salmon can miss this, or if they migrate down to sea too early, they can miss this. And this means basically survivorship in that year of salmon is very poor. And this obviously then trickles up to the killer whales, who then don't have enough food. And then we're seeing, you've probably seen in the news, they've potentially lost 2 of the southern resident killer whale populations, even reported this year, which is devastating when there's only now 73 left. So a lot of the work that we're trying to do is to basically get some grants to investigate the salmon themselves. So it's one thing, obviously, protecting the killer whales, but there's a whole other thing when you're looking at what they're eating and seeing how maybe you can monitor the environment's pollution. You can monitor temperature over time and weather events, and see maybe how we could change regulations to, for example, removing particular barriers where there are particularly threatened populations of salmon, to improve survivorship, to remain more food there for the killer whales to eat and more likely for that population to survive. So I think really we need to start looking at the level ecosystem as a whole, from the prey fish to the salmon to the top predators such as killer whales. And that is something that ocean wise that we are really working towards right now. We have a few projects that we're hoping to start soon to really start targeting, because you can't save something unless you know where something is. And this is what we're going to be targeting with some of our future projects, to look more at locations that need to be better protected, locations where things need to be better regulated to prevent future, population crashes.
Yeah. Would you mind expanding on some of those new projects that are coming up?
Yeah, so we're hoping to get some funding to, as I said, do some work with salmon around the Salish Sea. So we're looking at basically employing sort of more novel methods to monitor salmon and cetaceans sort of together. So we're looking at using some more sort of DNA-based methods to monitor those species over seasons, over years, and look at some trends. So there's a lot of data gaps as to where salmon actually go when they enter the rivers. So this is something that we're looking at addressing via a number of methods, one of which being some DNA-based work. And this is Oceanwise has a big genetics lab, and this is some of the work we'll be doing in collaboration with sort of my Victoria office and then the genetics lab and a mix of some of the photogrammetry team. So we're really applying these ecological concepts, you know, from the phytoplankton up to the top marine predators, to look at how they interact with each other and identify areas, critical areas for conservation.
That's really exciting. I'm looking forward to that. I like working with salmon a lot. I like the study of salmon, so that's very, very exciting. And I think it's always, I don't know why, but I personally think it's like the coolest thing when multiple sides of different marine sciences and biology kind of combine to work on one specific issue. And you see that happening more and more, especially with Oceanwise. They kind of combine all the different fields to work on something. I guess for viewers and as well as myself, are there anything that we could do right now that people aren't really speaking about that could help with these issues, just in climate change in general, or more specified things for your field?
Yeah, so it's difficult because this is something that I kind of grapple with a lot. You know, everyone says the individual's actions speak, you know, louder than words. And yeah, at the same time, we're seeing all these issues with, you know, it's the big corporations that are causing a lot of the problems. And it's really hard. It's easy to feel disheartened and to kind of go, well, the world's doomed, and kind of give up.
Yeah.
And so, for example, when I was young, my mum used to say to me, if I left the lights on too long, you're killing polar bears, you know. And that's something that I've kind of carried with me in terms of, I try and day to day really consider my individual actions more in terms of the waste that I produce, in terms of you know, packaging and all that stuff, because we recently actually held a beach clean for the International Coastal Cleanup Week. And I think as a team we collected something like 500 kilograms worth of trash just from a handful of events around BC. And that really kind of opened my eyes to, you know, this is all from individuals, you know. And I think one way that you can really help everything, and obviously ocean pollution is part of, you know, the issue in conjunction with climate change. So 2 things I would say is educate yourself, find resources. And for example, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, so NOAA, has a great website, climate.gov, which has loads of information. And be critical of information you see. And this is something that, again, this is something that actually I was speaking with my wife about recently, saying, I wish there were classes in school that teach people how to think critically when looking at the news. And I think that's something, definitely, you know, knowledge is power. So even if it's something as reading an article once a week about climate change, you know, listen to scientists and, you know, find those, you know, sources, call out anything you see that is sort of inverted commas fake news or, you know, scaremongering, and just be critical. I think the more you know, educate yourself and find resources and knowledge and power, you can kind of help other people that maybe aren't grappling with it as well, or don't really know what to do. So it comes down to both the individual level of day-to-day actions, whether it be leaving lights on, whether it be, you know, selecting something, maybe cardboard versus plastic, or just saying, this source doesn't sound right, let's go find some information. Or, you know, there's so much out there, the internet is almost oversaturated now, but finding, you know, those resources that are sort of true, correct, you know, scientifically peer-reviewed, and being critical of what you see on the news. And, you know, this causes a lot of issues, as, you know, what's currently going on in the world. People can get the wrong information, and I think someone misinformed is you know, almost as bad as someone being ignorant about something. So I think, you know, definitely empowering yourself with this knowledge and thinking about your day-to-day actions, as well as supporting and looking at these, you know, organizations, you know, look at the Oceanwise website, look at, there's a plastics program on there, and, you know, there's climate change pages and information. You know, use these kind of resources to educate yourself and inform yourself, and you can volunteer and get involved in so many different ways to help these things, from donating to giving your time, etc., etc.
Yeah, and in the description of both the video and the recording, we'll be putting like multiple links, and to educate yourself as well as join in on of course there's like shoreline cleanups is like a very easy one. I feel personally I think it's like the simplest thing you can do is just go and clean up around your neighborhood, around a beach or a park or anything like that. Yeah, I think that education I completely agree with you. I feel like many people just believe they have to stop using straws, which is, of course, you should. But there's this other aspect of kind of learning and teaching yourself more, which is almost underrated right now. As like as you said, there's so much information that people kind of just stop looking at it.
Yeah.
At this point. Yeah. Would you say that, like, I guess the best way to put it is, would you say that your view on climate change has changed since you entered your field? Would you say that it's gotten more meaningful to you, or have you gotten a bit more hopeful?
Yeah, for sure, it's definitely changed. I think back before I went to university, so over 10 years ago, I kind of just saw climate change, because back then it was more referred to as global warming.
Right.
And, being from the UK where it's often relatively cold and rainy, I was like, hey, I'm for this,
Right.
So I was a little bit ignorant at first, but I think over the, as I said, the 5 years of my volunteer work, I saw the change, and that's scary. In my lifetime, I've seen a change in somewhere that I would go out every year. Those years where the storms were crazy, it wasn't, no pun intended, a fluke. It was, they're becoming more and more regular, and it's scary to see that in my lifetime, in that short 10-year period, how things have changed, even in the UK. And the last time I saw snow in the UK was 2010. Jeez. And, I left the UK in 2018. So that was, and as a kid, every year at some point we get snow. And that was scary for me. And, a lot of people would celebrate that. Oh, we hate the snow anyway. But I was like, but it means something bigger than that. And that would terrify me. And seeing more storms, you see these massive die-off events of fish because they can't withstand temperatures, especially this year in BC, there was that big heat wave, and that's scary, I try not to be doom and gloom about it, because, I just think it's bad enough as it is without, feeling sad about it all the time. And that's, again, what really pushed me to kind of leave academia and go more into NGO with conservation, because I could see in academia, I struggled to put my research in the conservation context, in terms of I couldn't see where my work was really going. Whereas working for an NGO, I'm like, I know what I am doing is making a difference. And climate change is happening, and we cannot switch it off in the same way that we can, knock down a dam. We can't do it as easily as that. But raising awareness and showing on a year-to-year basis how things are changing and how these species are, failing to respond to these changes, and making people aware, I think is, I wake up every day and say, hey, what can I do to help the whales today? And, climate change is now interwoven within that, and you cannot separate the two. It's not like, oh, we'll tackle climate change another day, but we're going to tackle this. No, it's all related, because it starts from, as I said, the phytoplankton up, to the top predators.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that that's one of the most challenging things to have to fight against in your career. Would you say there's others? What are other challenging aspects of your career right now, other than just constantly thinking about climate change in general and how that affects the cetaceans?
So I would say, and I kind of was grappling with this question a little bit, because I think when the whole phrase of do a job you love and you never have to work a day in your life,
right?
But that also applies the other way, in terms of do a job you love and every day is a work day. And this is kind of something that I struggled a lot with during my PhD, which is work-life balance. And I would actually say this is probably the most challenging part of, I guess, most careers, but having a career in this sector, academic or NGO, finding time for yourself and to kind of decompress, especially when you take on your shoulders things like the impacts of climate change, when you're seeing, killer whales die by the month because of our actions as people. It's heartbreaking, and it can be really demoralizing, and it can make you feel horrendous. And I always struggle with finding time to decompress, or like making myself sit and recover, emotionally, physically, from the work I do. And actually Oceanwise is fantastic for encouraging their staff to take weekends and evenings. It's been great, and since working for Oceanwise, I have struck more of a balance than I ever have in my life. But I would say in this field where your heart and your soul and every part of you is in your job because it's what you love, it can be really hard to take some time for yourself. So I make sure that I always have some creative time. So I like drawing, I like doing artwork, and I like writing just in general, blog posts and other things. So I think the most challenging part of my career for sure is finding time to do those things. And it's, I can be tempted to go, I'll just do another day of work. It's a weekend, but I really want to do this, or I really want to do more data. But that's, I think, the challenging part for me. It's sort of separating it a little bit to make sure that I'm finding enough time for myself.
Yeah, that's I think that's like a universal thing right now, especially with COVID. You're just constantly like, what else do you do? I guess I'll just keep working. I can relate to that as well. I understand that. Would you say that that Oceanwise is, you mentioned that Oceanwise is a very, very, very kind when it comes to the work-life balance. What else has Oceanwise changed for you with your career that you've seen so far?
Oh wow, quite a lot already. So I've only I started working for Oceanwise July, so I've only been with the organization for a few months.
Right.
But in that time I moved from Ontario to Victoria, where I am now, and I said, since I was 11 years old I've dreamt of living in Victoria, so this has been a lifelong dream come true. And it's the contacts too. So I've been put in touch with a lot of people at the DFO, and I've been put in touch with people from all sort of different research organizations that collaborate with Oceanwise, such as immerse and all different organizations. Again, I can send the links and the full names for those for you. And that's been really great to be with like-minded people. So I was very much, the only whale nerd, if you want to call it that, when I was doing my, my PhD and my postdoc. And it allowed me to be back by the sea again. So the 3 years I was in Guelph was probably the longest in my life. I've never been living by the sea. So I found that was super important to me to come back and kind of be, it kind of grounds me to be near the sea. And that was really important for me. And I've met so many fantastic people. My colleagues are amazing. Everyone is in the same mindset when it comes to doing this work. We do it for the love, we do it for the animals, and we do it to really try and make some change in the conservation field. And being around those kind of people and that energy in a really kind of loving and supportive environment has made me, I've noticed I'm a lot happier, I'm a lot more kind of relaxed in my spare time, and I feel like I'm really doing something. It's a really rewarding position, and I feel so lucky to work for such a great organization.
That's always that's a wonderful thing to realize when you find like a finally a good spot. I feel very lucky to have been working with Youth to Sea and Oceanwise as well. I wasn't expecting the energy that they bring as well. It's like amazing. A really wonderful mix. Would you say that would you recommend any other organizations for students to get into, sort of like Oceanwise, if they would like to work in a field similar to yours?
So there's, I guess it kind of depends on your location, but I would always start with sort of looking up any of the non-profits in your area. So a lot of the time there'll be kind of really small organizations, and actually a really good way to start, and this is a way that kind of it happened for me in the UK. So a lot of whale watch trip companies, for example, do partner with local organizations to report sightings, share information, share boat time. And actually in the UK, this is how I kind of got in touch with Sea-Watch Foundation through one of their kind of partnered and approved boat operators. So if you're looking especially to get in the field with marine mammals, that's one way to start. Sort of have a little look around at the local tour operators, see if they post who they work with. And Google's your friend in this case. Google whatever organizations are local to you, and they often have career or volunteer pages, and just reach out and see what's available. Sometimes they'll list volunteer jobs almost on job sites, and they'll have internships or placement positions. And essentially you just have to do a little bit of research, and it can be hard if you're landlocked and you want to do something marine based, but this is where you can really get involved remotely. Often these organizations have data to sift through, or they need some resources pulled together there, or website help. There are so many ways to get involved. It's just, you have to kind of dedicate that time to sit down and do a little bit of research into what's local to you, or what's maybe where you want to end up, or again, through your school or your university. They often have groups that are kind of, again, in collaboration with universities or schools for placements. And also, one bit of advice, which I think is really underrated, is reach out to your heroes. They say never meet your heroes, but for me, if I had never contacted Ingrid, I would never be where I am now. And she was brilliant, and she spent the time in her very busy schedule to reply to me, and I was really, really grateful for that. And I think if you see, in the days of social media, you can, again, this is going back kind of before Facebook for me, when I kind of messaged Ingrid, but you can find these people and message them. There's ResearchGate, there's LinkedIn, there's so many resources and places. Drop people a message, say, hey, do you have time for a Zoom chat? I'd like to, find out more about how you got where you are. Communication is key. And people like me, I'm bursting to tell my story all the time, because I came about it in a roundabout way. I'm not an A-star student by any stretch of the imagination. I failed a lot of my exams, and yet I'm still here. Like, unfortunately, universities try and make sometimes things look very linear. Oh, you do this, you do that, and you get your dream job, but it's not. And by speaking to people in the field, you sort of start to see your own situation in real life that's actually ended up in success. So I think speak to people, find organizations, and get involved as much as you can.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. All of that, all of those like tips, I guess is the best word, as they're also, I feel, seemingly pretty underrated. Instead of just taking the linear path. I agree with you. I mean, the reason why this podcast is for that sole reason, is to meet people from so many different fields and speak to them about their opportunities and their academic path and how they got there. So once again, all those links will be also in the description as well for different programs and opportunities and people to speak to. I guess to close off for our final few questions here, would you say there's anything else about your field that you weren't expecting when you first got into it and working with whales and dolphins and porpoises and such?
Yeah, so I guess with any kind of big charismatic megafauna such as whales and dolphins, I didn't realize the amount of politics involved. And this is something to be very mindful of. Not everyone is in, again, no pun intended, the same boat when it comes to some of the directions for conservation and for activities. Not everyone is out for the animal's best interest. So I would definitely keep a very open mind. And I was a little bit naive coming into the field, and you sometimes don't realize that there is a very interesting and existing relationship, both positive and negative, between different organizations, between different people. So I think it's be very open-minded when you come in, that not everyone is thinking the same thing. Not everyone does the same thing. Everyone has very different ways of doing things. And I think for something as charismatic as I said, as whales and dolphins, porpoises, it's not everyone is going to think the same thing. And that got me unstuck a few times, where I was a bit shocked to find out certain things, or that certain organizations did things so differently, or that certain organizations didn't even speak to each other, which was a little bit of a surprise for me. So I think if you're part of one organization, don't just ignore the other organization, because that's what happens. I'm a big believer in relationship building, and I think where possible, try and work with as many people as possible, and don't shut doors, basically, is what I'm saying, because things change very rapidly, relationships change very rapidly, and politics can look very different in different ways. So I would for sure say be aware of that, especially, I've also done a little bit of work with bats as well in my spare time, and it's a very similar field, very similar issues with, some gatekeeping involved. Some organizations aren't overly welcome to new people coming in, and that is, as I say, gladly changing with, for example, more younger females getting in the industry, and other minorities, which has been brilliant. And some of these sort of older attitudes are sort of dissipating out, and that's another thing. Things are changing. There's some people that have always done it like this and they're really resistant to change. But with more and more younger people infiltrating, the industry at different levels, and, more educated individuals coming into these roles and taking over some, managerial positions and director positions, things are changing for good. There's a lot more open-minded people in the industry. So things will change very rapidly. And just to be aware of that there might still be some of this old stuck in the ways attitude in the field with some organizations. And again, just to be aware of that and encourage change where possible.
Yeah, what a lovely thing to end on, is just to think about the change and that it will always change, it will continue changing, and that's such a good thing to think about, especially when it comes to marine biology, marine sciences, how those sciences are always evolving and changing as well. Chloe, thank you so much for speaking with us today. It was so lovely to hear about your experience and your career and how you got there. It was honestly incredibly eye-opening for me. I hope to work with whales one day as well. So it was very exciting to speak with you. Do you have anything else to leave off with? A website people can check out, or an account everyone could see?
Yeah, for sure. I would just want to finish off by saying, if you want to find out more about Oceanwise, in particular the Whales Initiative, or the BC Cetacean Sightings Network, which is the department I'm employed under, they have a website, wildwhales.org. Again, I'll send the link for you there. And we also have we post fantastic photos from the field on Instagram, so that's at Oceanwise Research, so you can check that out as well. And also, I just want to say that if anyone listening wants to contact me personally, wants to have a chat, Zoom conversation to speak more about careers, there's a lot, I think, that I've also done that, we didn't have time to discuss everything here, but I would be more than happy to speak with anyone. So yeah, you can, I'll drop my Twitter handle in the links, and my work email too. So please feel free to reach out to me. I'm here to listen and offer more advice, and I really want to support as many people as I can coming into this industry. So please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you so much, Chloe. And thank you for all those links and all that information. It was very lovely to speak with you. And thank you for everyone else listening. We will see you on the next episode. Bye.